how you're not sweating right now, because his
makeup.
Yes, exactly. His opera opens next week. And talking about sort of what's next in the arts for the Asian American community. So I want to introduce you to the man on my left, the very distinguished David Henry Huang, who's the playwright of a play that's starting in the fall called Yellowface. He is also opening next week an opera called The American Soldier, which we'll talk about. American Soldier, which we'll talk about. It opens May 12th. And sitting next to him is Rosalind Chow, who everyone recognizes from Stage and Screen. She's in The Three Body Problem, right, on Netflix. And I happen to love you as Mulan's mother, but that's just me as mom in the action flick. And you were playing opposite the fabulous B.D. Wong, who everyone and they are playing in an incredibly interesting play. Obviously, and Butterfly, you hit the ceiling and beyond with that, obviously, the two of you. But obviously your career has been so rich throughout, and we'll hit on some of those. But I want to start with this play that you guys are duetting in, starting in mid-May, and it's an interesting sort of look at diaspora. It's a story of two siblings, one born here, one born there, right? And sort of what that means. It's called What Became of Us. But BD, why don't you start? Tell us a bit about it.
Well, I love the play because it is written in a poetically, neutrally ethnic way. And that affords the production the ability to have different casts from different cultures play these same parts. It is a brother-sister relationship. It's a little bit about how when you were born and where you were born affects your relationship to your parents and to each other. So we have very different relationships to our parents in the play.
And to identity.
And to identity. And birth order, how that affects. So it really does cross all, it's not just about immigrants, but it is about immigrants as well.
Yeah.
So, we've found that people from all walks of life seem to be drawn to it.
It's quite beautiful. It's beautifully written by, oh my gosh, I have so many names in my head, I get them all mixed up. Cheyenne Laffey is the playwright, and it's a debut for him, and it's a beautifully written play.
And so, Rosalind, how would you characterize the characters? Describe who they are, and how they interact.
She's the good one. She was born in the other country, whichever the other country is, and as a result has a little bit more of a bond with her parents, as any older child does, but it's exponentially more because she was born in the other country and remembers the language of the old country. And then comes number two, and there's a little bit of a dynamic where, it's a difference, it's a cultural shift as well that happens in households of immigrants. I'm sure it's very familiar to all of us. And so many people that I've spoken to who come from immigrant families, who read it, each person feels like it's about them. So that's how you know it's a wonderful play.
Yeah.
We have a crew of all people who are children of immigrants, and each one thinks it's their story, but it's not, it's really mine.
And so I'm curious, I'm curious about An American Soldier, right? I mean, that's your next big production. Tell me about what drew you to the story, what makes it an opera in your view, and just tell me the story of the part of it.
So it's the story of based on the true story of Private Danny Chen, and he was
not to be confused with Vincent Chen,
right?
Another historic figure in the Asian
right. And Danny was a Chinatown kid, born and raised in Lower Manhattan, and enlisted in the U.S. Army in 2011. Was sent to the Kandahar region of Afghanistan, where he was basically kind of racially hazed to death. And I was approached,
Reading about this, yeah.
yeah, I was approached by a woman named Liz Ouyang, who is a civil rights attorney and advocate. And she asked me if I wanted to write a play about Danny, and I actually didn't, because it just didn't fit into my sort of aesthetic interest at the time. I tend to, in recent years, I've written more sort of meta things and comedies, and like the show we're doing on Broadway this fall. But the composer Huang Ro had a commission from Washington National Opera in DC, and we were looking for something to do together. And so we actually thought this would be a great story for an opera, because opera's sort of big and emotional and primary colors and love and death. So we did a 1-hour version of it in Washington, DC, which we then had an opportunity to expand into a full-length version in St. Louis. But we really made a commitment to the family, which has been incredibly supportive of this opera, even though it's been very painful for them to, relive all this. And we made a commitment we would do our best to bring Danny's story back to New York. Because this is where he's from, and this is where his family is, and the people who knew him. And there's only really one major opera company in New York, which is the Met. So very fortunately for us, this new artistic center, PAC NYC, which is built at the World Trade Center, opened this year. And
I'm told it's a beautiful
it's
facility.
a fantastic building. It's a great theater where you can kind of go there and hang out. They have like free entertainment in the lobby, and they committed to bring the story here. So this gives us finally the opportunity to bring Danny home.
That's beautiful. Everyone, and BD, I'm curious, you work on productions that, like CSI, that are not particularly Asian American. We love him on CSI, right? And, say again? Oh, sorry, SVU. Let me say that again. We love you on SVU. You're on productions that aren't necessarily Asian American stories or storylines or casts or productions. And how much do you try to pick and choose your projects, and this is both of you, to align with that kind of storytelling, to the extent that those stories that are Asian American tend to then, give experience to the producers and the writers and the directors and the people behind the scenes as well?
Tell me more about what this specific question is.
So, how do you choreograph which projects?
The choices.
Yes, the choices that you make.
Well, I think the choices are super complicated, and there's choices about every aspect of any production, the role, the quality of the role that the role plays in the bigger picture of the project, the way that your ethnicity or your race is positioned in that or not positioned in the project, and how much you're getting paid and where you're going and all the things. So it ends up being really maddening to make these choices, I think. It has always been really tricky to negotiate the minefield of whether or not you can continue to make a living and also feel good about everything that you're doing.
That's such real talk. Yeah, no, seriously. And yet you must enjoy being parts of these passion projects where, it's about community, right?
Absolutely,
Yes.
and sometimes, I live for the roles that they have written, not necessarily Asian, but then I get to step in them. That's delicious.
Yes.
But it's also wonderful when you finally get to work with other Asian Americans who you've enjoyed watching, like, Benny Wong and people like that. And there is a sense of community, and BD, there's a shorthand,
Yeah.
So even though we're not getting paid much, but like something like this play, when it came across, BD texted me and was like, "Are you gonna?" And once I read it, I thought, you know what? It's either the material or the people you're working with for me, the people I'm working with is huge. All it takes is for me to hear about one bad apple, and I'm not so interested in it. One bad apple can ruin the whole bunch.
But it's also about the writing too, and it is a
Yeah.
very beautifully written play. And it makes me remember when I made my Broadway debut in David's play, and I'd never read a play of this quality, of his voice, of this skill, and I was amazed that there was an opportunity such as that, and it's never really been quite the same as all of those things coming together for me at that time. And I think that's really important. I think it's like, you have to really recognize it when it's happening.
Absolutely.
And you can fake the material. I mean, you can
Yes.
fake a lot of other things. You can't fake the material. So if the
Absolutely.
script's bad,
And I want you to elaborate on M. Butterfly, because there may be some in the audience who are so young, they certainly might not have been able to see it in person, and yet you won all 5 New York Theater Awards with your performance. Drama Desk Award, Outer Critics Award, Theater
oh,
Award.
now it's going to be
President.
impossible.
Tony, yeah. And it was groundbreaking in so many ways, and yet, David, maybe give us a plot summary and how some of those very interesting issues around identity still linger to today.
Yeah, so obviously we were incredibly lucky to find BD, but it's the based on a true story. I really think this is my brand.
Yes.
And,
From the headlines.
about a French diplomat who had a 20-year affair with a Chinese actress who turned out to be A, a spy, and B, male. And when they were arrested and all this came out, the diplomat claimed that he never knew the gender of his lover. So as an author, this raised a very obvious question for me: how could the diplomat not have known? And it's
We all walked out of the theater shaking our heads, scratching our heads. And your performance was incredible.
BD did the original production on Broadway with John Lithgow as the diplomat, and it has had several different iterations. But I think particularly when there was a version that we did on Broadway again in 2017, and I was looking at the issues in the play, and certainly our understanding of gender has changed a lot since 1988, when the original play happened, as well as the power balance between East and West. In 1988, there was sort of the sense that, China might rise, but basically, if anybody was feeling that there was a major Asian power on the horizon, it was Japan. And so lots of things have changed, and yet I feel like the play continues to investigate questions that we're still trying to figure out, not to mention.
And I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but you're doing it again in London as an opera,
Well,
right?
we're doing an opera version of that. I have a lot of opera happening. And with the same composer that I worked on American Soldier with, while we're up. And we're doing it at the Barbican in London in October.
How does the character, the role, the play, or the musical rather, resonate with you to this day?
The thing that resonates for me to this day was David's hypothetical answer to the question how could he not know? And his answer is laced with a discussion about racism, about stereotyping, about a misunderstanding people of different colors, about coveting someone of a certain race and objectifying them. And these things are all still very real.
Fetishizing.
Yes. And that's a big part of the center of their relationship. And so the play really, to me, holds up in many ways, aside from the discussion that we could have about gender and how we, nothing's, a reveal where someone who presents as a woman is actually what we call a man is not a big deal anymore.
Right.
And it was a really big deal then, actually.
It was quite shocking.
It was shocking.
Yeah, and there's still the feminization of Asian males and the desexualization
Yes.
of them. That still is, that exists to this day.
I want to explore a personal note with you, Rosalind. I read that your parents were Peking opera
Yes.
singers,
Yeah.
performers.
Yeah, my uncle was as well.
And your family, and they came to the States and did the immigrant thing.
Yes.
And yet encouraged you to be a performer, and worked in a restaurant,
Well, they encouraged me to be in their Peking opera shows, but outside of their Peking opera shows, maybe not so interested because it interfered with school. So as long as it didn't interfere with school, it was, a go.
So they stayed true to the Tiger parents.
So,
Yeah.
well, they weren't I was latchkey, but in theory, they still wanted me to do well, despite the fact that they didn't want to have anything to do with it.
But it was a very, obviously prestigious, interesting line of work, and then to come to the States and work in that immigrant.
Well, they weren't professional. My uncle was a professional Peking opera singer, but my parents had a love for it, let's put it that way, and started a Chinese opera club here, and that was their first love, I would venture to say, yeah. So
Was it in New York? Where was that?
that
Where
was,
did
they
set
started
up?
in New York, and then they were in LA.
Oh.
I played boys.
Interesting. And yet they must have been so proud of you entering into entertainment and.
BT knows so much because
BJ's like, are you gonna tell the truth?
we're in this rehearsal room where we're really swapping stories about our parents, and I feel like people in that rehearsal room that I've only met 2 weeks ago probably know more about my upbringing than people who've known me for years, than you've known.
I've known you since you were 18,
I
and
know,
I didn't
that's
know you
true.
came from a Peking opera.
I
Like I've been learning it on TV.
It's like a little secret, yeah.
But
And so they weren't particularly. I feel like a therapist now. Share
they weren't overly enthusiastic. Especially, as I got older, my dad used to say, "Oh, okay, that's a hobby." But now,
Yes.
so.
But you were in Joy Luck Club. I mean.
Anytime somebody says they recognize it from Joy Luck Club, I always know they love their mother.
No. I need to tell my mother that.
Yes.
So David, I want you to talk about Yellowface and the issues that it brings up in the way actors are cast. So tell the audience, if you will, another plot line ripped from the headlines.
Right.
And this is coming out in the fall with Daniel Day Kim.
yeah, so
Little known, low profile guy.
yeah. So Yellowface is kind of an unreliable memoir about a Tony Award-winning playwright named David Henry Wong, who protests the casting of a white actor, Jonathan Pryce, as the Asian lead in the original production of Miss Saigon when it comes to Broadway, which BD was also very much involved in. But then in the play, David then inadvertently cast a white actor as the Asian lead in his own show, thinking that the actor is of mixed race. And when he finds out that the actor is actually just white, he tries to cover up his blunder to protect his reputation as an Asian American role model. And,
And you are the unreliable narrator,
I'm the
clearly.
narrator, and it's an opportunity to look at some of these issues of representation and appropriation that we're dealing with now, but have kind of a good laugh at them, mostly at my expense. However, I'm being played by Daniel Day Kim, so that's pretty cool. And
You have very similar cheekbones.
and we just released an audible. We just released an audible version, which is available with Daniel and Ashley Park and Benedict Wong, Wendell Pierce and Jason Biggs, and cameos from everyone from Margaret Cho to Jane Krakowski.
You know, it's fascinating because I happen to know Daniel a little bit, and I was talking to him about Joyride, which was last summer's raunchy Asian American female comedy. They go for a joyride, and they were trying to cast some of the roles, and they cast Daniel Day in one of them. It was because he knows Adele Lim, the director, and Adele said, "Hey, do you know any young, good Asian American, whatever, who could play this role?" And he's the one who suggested Ashley Clark, yeah, for that role. And I just think that it's a small community, and it's a community of people who know and work with and respect and admire each other. I think it's really wonderful. But I was curious your thoughts, BD, on the idea of casting, whitewashing or not, yellow face or not.
You mean like actual yellowface?
Sure.
Or cross?
Or how do we think of that in modern terms?
Okay, keep it short, because I have a lot to say.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, it's juicy.
Ah.
Jonathan Price is in Three Body Problem.
Ah.
So
But
there's a story
here's,
there.
yes, there is a story here. But do you want to
Jonathan
say your
Price,
thing
wait,
first?
Wait,
and
I'll
then
say my thing
I'm
first, and I'll
speaking
get out of the way.
Okay.
Say your piece.
Hurry up.
Well, I mean, it's as a young actor coming up, and over the many years, it is a source of great frustration. It is a source of great rage. It is a potential source of great bitterness to just kind of watch over and over again other people getting opportunities. And you have to really be strong about it, and you have to kind of keep things in perspective. You have to just understand that that's kind of a fact. And at the same time, it's important to kind of work towards creating consciousness raising in order to people to understand what is exactly that we don't approve of in this situation. And it has to do with opportunities being taken from us, I guess is part of it, and also the appropriation angle of it, which is quite a big deal. And that's all. That's really. I'm gonna hand it over to you.
Okay, yeah, because I'm already like
Yeah.
Worked up.
Okay. So going back to, so this is two-part. Going back to the Jonathan Price issue, I have worked with him. We have spoken about it, and
Oh, really?
yes,
Yes.
and I think in
Oh,
your play
everyone's-
you named me.
Yes.
You name checked me.
Yes.
And my
She's
husband.
in Yellowface.
Because he was in the
In
premiere.
the early version,
Because
so
I was
sorry, I
the,
cut
that's okay, I'll break the news to him. But, because I was the person who first saw the play of Miss Saigon at a dress rehearsal, because my husband's English. So
In London.
in London. And I called up David at an ungodly hour and said, "Oh my God, you wouldn't believe what I just saw." And that, hence the whole Miss Saigon. But here's the thing, I've spoken to him, to Jonathan, and honestly, that was a different era, and there was not a lot of understanding then. He has explained to me, because at the RSC, everybody used to play every race. So at the time, he didn't have full knowledge about the fine points, as a lot of white people, let's be honest, don't really understand the fine points. And so he was kind of thrown under the bus. He was known as the face of the ignorance. And whereas in fact, he was just told to shut up, go out there and do your job. So that's his point of view. I'm sticking up for him. He's a lovely man and really is traumatized by the fact that he feels, it's
Like a villain in the narrative, right? Yeah.
Okay, can
But
I have a story?
wait, let me just go on.
We're all dishing.
I know. That aside, yes, it's awful painting your face a different color, like black face, yellow face, and for a while, yellow face was okay, but black face wasn't. And it still has been recently. But now the problem is, we've corrected it, but now I feel like we've gone too far. There are so many Asian American actors who are only allowed to play their particular ethnicity. So let's say it's a Japanese actor, and he's told, you cannot play Chinese, you cannot play Korean. And that's limiting them as actors. Why can everybody in the TV show The Bear is not Italian?
Right.
They can do it.
They can all play Italians.
Yeah, why can't we? We're not painting our face. We still look the same. Why can't BD play a young Korean man?
Well,
Or older Korean man?
of the things that the producer Cameron McIntosh said was they did a worldwide search to try to find an actor to play the engineer, and they couldn't find any Asian who was qualified. And
So
so that way it's never been, yeah, it's very insulting and it's never been retracted. And I was in, I was sharing a car to the airport once with Nick Heitner, who is the director of Miss Saigon. And we were, you know.
Really dizzy now.
And Nick, you know, Nick's a great guy, and he was just very honest. He said, "Oh, I was so embarrassed when that happened. We never had a worldwide search. We never looked. It's just, you know, Jonathan. We brought Jonathan to London because he was our friend, which actually is the way. I mean, it feels like such a true story. That's how things happen. So I feel like there was never kind of a retraction of that
No,
statement.
there wasn't.
No.
And he was never, also, he was thrown under the bus. They made him the bad guy. Well, they did.
Well, it's gonna happen again this fall.
Well, so how much has changed in your view? Everyone's talking about this giant renaissance, or not even renaissance, but this blossoming of Asian Americans in the arts, whether it's, you know, Parasite to Minari to Everything Everywhere All at Once, or, you know, this last theater season I did There Here Lies Love, which is the Filipino story of Imelda Marcos, and there was K-pop, which if you blinked you missed it. But you know, again, lots of Asian American performers, lots of Asian American choreographers, writers, directors, all of it. And then there are the Asian American performers that I've interviewed in Little Shop of Horrors,
Right.
Darren Criss, right, or the first Asian American to play Dear Evan Hansen, right? So where do you see the progress, and where do you think there still needs to be progress in all of the things I just threw out?
I just think there's a differentiation though between, I'm just gonna start with that in a new, I'm so bossy, but between Asian American, and that's my one issue is that, obviously I have many issues, but that there is a blanket sometimes around, like they'll bring like actors who their first language isn't English, but they're still put under the Asian American label. So there is a difference. You know, we were born and raised here, and so there should be a little more fluidity for us as far as performers. And then there's, you know, we're all Asian, which is great, but there is a difference, and I do notice that the one thing that is happening is everybody's placed under the Asian American label, not just by you just now, but I see it everywhere, and there's a slight difference, you know.
Sure.
Not to be snobbish or anything, but.
No. And so where, BD, do you see progress? Where do you see where there needs more room to run?
I think as painful and weird and traumatic for everyone that this whole protest over Miss Saigon was, it was the cracking open of a door to a discussion that had never, ever been had before, about that began with that and led to a discussion about representation, appropriation, diversity, inclusion. These words were never even in our vocabulary in 1992. They became part of our vocabulary, and part of the Miss Saigon thing is, in our community, the root of our ability to articulate the nuances of what we're talking about here. So I see a slow, kind of incrementally encouraging opening of this door, which is I think the most positive thing about it is the influx of young talent and young writers and young people behind the camera, and a much more of a fluidity and a much more of an ability for them and us to get work.
I kind of already asked you this question, BD, but I was in conversation with a young Korean-American stage performer named Abraham Kim.
Oh, I know.
Do you know Abraham? Yes,
Yes,
his
lovely,
follow.
yeah.
He's adorable, and he was in K-pop, I can say that because I'm a woman of a certain age. And he was thinking, oh, I hear Crazy Rich Asians is coming to Broadway. And he's already thinking, did you know that? Did you know that? And he's already thinking, do I want to do that? Do I not want to do that? And how do you make those choices?
I don't think that's enough. We have enough information about Crazy Rich Asians, the musical, to know whether we want to do it or not do it. I mean, as a thing, I don't think there's any reason not to do it. But if it doesn't float my boat, or if I don't feel like I can do what I do, there's a lot of reasons, like I said before, about how you make those choices.
Right, and it's
So
also about what stories do we tell about our community?
Yeah.
Is it the farewell? Is it Joyride? Is it Crazy Rich Asians? Or is it An American Soldier?
I mean, I feel like one of the things that has really changed, even just in the last 3 or 4 years, is it is more of a proliferation of Asian stories and faces and narratives, particularly in film and television. And for a long time, I thought, okay, when I was starting out, if you're going to do an Asian story in film or television, you had to figure out a way to put a white guy in the center of it. And then that eventually, when there started to be some Asian American story, or Asian stories, it's this distinction that you're talking about, I thought, okay, if you're going to have Asian Americans, they have to be kind of in an Asian setting, like Crazy Rich Asians, right? So it's kind of Asian American light. Or even The Farewell. The Farewell is Asian Americans in China.
Yeah.
But then more recently, you have shows like Beef,
Yeah.
which are, with things that I didn't think you could get away with.
But also, like, we have actors, and our community needs to embrace this more, that there's a movie called Greatest Hits. There's an actor named Justin, I'm just having a brain fart. Too much memorization. But he's the romantic lead with a white woman as the lead. We've got Maya Erskine playing, she's in Mr. and Mrs. Smith. She's the, female lead, the Angelina Jolie part. So we do have, and everything she's done has been sort of non-Asian specific, but then it creates an Asian storyline. It gets more work for Asian Americans.
Well, it's interesting, you mentioned Beef, and last week, because it's AAPI month, I was in conversation with Stephen Young. And I was asking him all these questions about, like, how purposeful are you in blowing up all these stereotypes in Beef, in others, and he said the thing about when I was in Walking Dead, I had the white girlfriend, and then it was like, I'm done, we'll move to the next thing. And recently he was offered something where it was like, well, you're not a hero, but suddenly you become the tough guy. And he was like, wait, that's a stereotype. Like, why am I not the tough guy? And it's surprising to you that I become the tough. So it's all of these, really thoughtful choices that artists make and writers make and people make about the choices. And he said very specifically that he and Ali Wong, as producing partners, were unafraid to show warts and all, the humanity and all, each and every one of us who make bad choices or say bad words or do the things that they did in Beef.
Yeah. I mean, they also address something really interesting that I haven't seen, that sort of the anger,
The rage.
simmering rage, that the whole things. And what's interesting is I felt like a lot of people who didn't grow up Asian American didn't get that. But we all had an instant familiarity with
And
that.
yet it was a big mainstream hit. So I think people can understand the it resonates.
Well, I mean, I think there's this general principle that the specific is the universal. And what we discovered is that if you can be more specific about a culture and it feels authentic, people who are not from that culture, if it's a well-told story, they can relate to it. They may not understand the particular kind of suppressed anger, but they will understand some sort of connection to rage because it's a universal human property.
Absolutely.
That's the play that we're doing is kind of a variation on that, on what David is saying. Is that there's this crazy kind of universality and yet there is, what he's taken out is the specificity, the traditional kind of specificity that you get about what country someone came from and all the things they did when they got here. Those things can actually be very shared
Yes.
in the immigrant experience, and so the playwright is really exploring that universality through a kind of generality, actually.
So you have the first, we're starting the production. I wish
Yes.
we were finishing it, but we're starting it, and then
Tony Shalhoub and Shorey Agdashlu are going to kind of overlap with us and then take over. So you could see both versions. You can see the Lebanese Persian version of this play, and you can see the Asian American version of this play.
It's quite universal.
and then he
It
doesn't
is.
have to change a word.
That's incredible.
Yes.
I'm excited to see it now. We have so many tickets to buy and books to buy and things to stream
Thank
and
goodness,
audibles
right?
to buy. Exactly.
Yeah, that's a good
That
sign.
is the flourishing of Asian American art. So we're down to our last couple of minutes. So closing thoughts as you look on the horizon for Asian Americans in the world of arts. And all encompassing.
Spend your money on Asian content. That's how it works, right? That's how it works, and we see all of these opportunities that other people seem to have, and how do they get them? And you go to like the Wiz on Broadway, and you see just a sea of African American faces,
Also-
and we really want that for us.
Yes, and also let's not tear each other down, because I do think there's a perfectionism sometimes in Asian Americans, as that we want everything that we do to be, straight A's. But I think if we have a little kindness towards our own, I think that's really beneficial too. I do feel our community needs to really embrace everything we do.
I think those of us who, are older and have been doing this for a while remember a time when, if you were an Asian artist and creator and you got some visibility, you were somehow expected to represent the entire community.
Right, exactly.
And of course, nobody can do that. And one of the things that's wonderful about this period is that we should be able to have a range of stories, and that you can debate them and you can decide, this one I can relate to, this one maybe not so much, the same way you would debate any movie, and appreciate the multiplicity of points of view and experiences that are part of our community.
And quality too. I mean,
Yes.
we should be able to fail.
Absolutely.
And not feel like we're taking the whole community down.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your What Became of Us, and of course, Yellowface and An American Soldier starting next week. But also, I just want to thank All Arts, the WNET group, and the Exploring Hates Initiative, partnering with Serica Initiative in this narrative change space in AAPI. It's just such a wonderful evening. Big thoughts, big creativity. Thank you so much for joining us.